Okay, thanks everybody for hanging out for a minute. My name is Will Davella. I work with Penrose, and tonight I appreciate everyone's attendance. We're going to do community engagement event number 2. This one is virtual and is a follow-up for the in-person event we held earlier this month. To take a quick look at the table of contents and run through of tonight, we are going to take a quick first run through the Ulster County housing strategy, which led to this project, talk a little bit about the development team and where we are in the development process, do a recap on the results and the findings from the first meeting, then talk about project goals, design, precedents, the proposed development plan and concept, and then follow up with community engagement, a quick mention on affordability, and then we'll open it up to questions. And with that, I'll hand it over to Evelyn.
All right, thanks, Will. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining tonight. I'm Deputy County Executive Evelyn Wright. I lead the county's housing strategy. We began working on addressing the housing crisis in the spring of 2020, and we took a twofold approach. We wanted to make sure we had a good understanding of the situation, which of course began to change almost as soon as we began to study it due to COVID. And we also wanted to move as quickly as we could to take action where we could. So last year, we worked with a group of 9 great folks from around the county on our Housing Advisory Committee to review the best publicly available data we could get on housing affordability, income, housing supply, and level of housing cost stress town by town in Ulster County, and really moved to understand what's driving unaffordability in the county and how we could work with our municipalities to increase our housing supply. So we reached that, we released that housing action plan in February, and we're now working on a program we call the Housing Smart Communities Initiative, which will work with municipalities around the county to find ways to try to speed the development of new housing, as well as to make the housing that we have more affordable. The second prong of that housing strategy, like I said, was to move as quickly as we could to increase our housing supply. And that meant identifying county-owned property that would be suitable for housing construction. And so the site of the former jail on Golden Hill was identified as the first priority for that. And so the county released a request for qualifications to find a developer. And through a review of the proposals we got, selected the Penrose team to essentially create a new neighborhood up on top of Golden Hill. And so we're super excited to be working with them. And with that, I'll turn it back to Will to talk about the project.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Evelyn. First, I want to run through the development team, talk about who we are. I work with Penrose. We are a Philadelphia-based developer, but we operate nationwide. I sit in the New York office, and we work throughout the state of New York, from New York City, up the Hudson, and all the way up to Buffalo as well. With me also is 2 members of WRT, our landscape and architecture firm. They also operate nationwide and have a very close relationship with Penrose, having worked together in collaboration for greater than 20 years. Also on the team is Chazen, a premier planning and civil engineering firm based in Poughkeepsie. Stephen Winter Associates, one of the nation's leading sustainability consulting and engineering firms. Renaissance Consultants, a New York-based firm focusing on facilitating local hiring, MWBE contracting, and compliance tracking. Cannon, Heyman, and Weiss, our local attorney. Penrose Management Company, our property management arm, who will be operating the property after it's completed. And Family of Woodstock, our local housing and supportive services partner, who I do believe is here today as well. And next, I just want to walk through where we are in this community engagement process. This is the virtual version of the second meeting, which took place in person earlier this month. We expect to have a number of continued workshops in person and virtual moving forward throughout the end of the year. And we hope to complete that with a really comprehensive report on everything that we've learned and heard throughout the process and the changes that we've made based on that input. We hope to release that at the end of the year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards we get to the back of the presentation. For now, I just want to do a quick introduction to this virtual format, which is modeled after the in-person events that took place earlier this month, but has been adjusted to ensure that we can have the same functionality on the computer. In person, we had a number of actual stations focused on different themes, such as programming, the site design, and housing affordability. Here, we're going to have the same sort of stations, but they'll be virtual. We'll have a screen for each and a poll. So I'm just want to show you quickly what that looks like. Here was our welcome screen, or excuse me, welcome station we had in person. We'll have similar screens in the future slides, and we'll have polls connected to them, such as this. We're actually going to do a quick poll, just make sure it works okay for everybody. So I'm going to launch this test poll right now. All right, everybody should see up on their screen quick test poll, make sure it's working. All right, I'm seeing some responses, so I think that means we're working okay. That we'll have a number of those throughout the event tonight. And I just want to mention at the bottom here, this other option. If you do not see, if you want to write in an option, a number of these are open-ended questions, please just go over to the Q&A and type in your answer, and we'll log that and make sure to release the answers after the event. And next, I want to turn to some of the feedback we heard in the first event. We've tried to lay that along the screen, along the site plan here, but I'll walk through some of the main things that we heard. One is concerns about traffic affecting the nearby neighborhoods, and specifically the removal of debris from demolition and site redevelopment through the adjacent residential neighborhoods. And we released a Q&A response after that event, specifically addressing that. And we committed to ensuring that the debris was not trucked through the adjacent residential neighborhood, and mentioned some of the specifics around the rules that would ensure that we would not do so. Secondly, we heard some concerns about some of the roads around us as well, specifically the connection from Golden Hill and Route 32 below. And we released an answer about how that would be studied in this project via the State Environmental Quality Review process, and that the development team intends to do an intensive traffic study that will be getting started soon and released for everyone to review on their own time. And finally, one of the other questions we've heard in person and at the last virtual event was questions about affordability and who's going to live here at the site. We have a slide towards the end. I'll sort of walk through the different affordability levels and what that means for a family of one, a family of four, how much that means they make on an annual basis, and our intention to really spread that out to make sure there's a really broad level of affordability on the site. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Bruce Chamberlain from WRT, who's going to walk through some of the preliminary site design and ideas. Bruce.
Thank you, Will. Again, my name is Bruce Chamberlain. I'm the project manager with WRT. And what we wanted to share with you tonight is part of a process. I mean, ultimately, what the community engagement meeting does is walk us through a planning process. And we're at the preliminary states of that. We've looked at some preliminary site development options. We've developed some ideas, and now we're here to share them with you. But in the process of doing this, there are a number of things that we have to consider when we start to think of a master plan. And probably key to this is what we call a program. And the program really starts to define our project goals and objectives. And it identifies needs, issues, and concerns, both with tangible and intangible items. And married with that, as we'll see a little bit further on in the presentation, is the existing site and other requirements. And that means, like, what is a site? We've got an interesting site here on Golden Hill, and it provides a number of opportunities and some challenges. But then there are also things like codes and building standards that we also have to start to implement. So all of these things start to inform our master plan as we develop that. But tonight, I wanted to specifically share with you some of these project goals. And so the first thing, that's starting to inform the type of housing. We're proposing intergenerational housing, and we're looking at upwards of about 160 units. Half of those are going to be set aside for seniors. As Will mentioned, there's going to be broad affordability. So that's one of the key objectives of the project itself. So one of the other things that we want to do is have opportunities for commercial and community programming. And what that means is, how can we integrate those things and provide those opportunities within the community itself? So we'd like to look at sponsoring programs centered around the supportive services, such as health and wellness, that we'd like to be able to provide for the community. We'd also like to start looking at multimodal transportation. So for example, we're going to be looking at to support community or connectivity to the greater Ulster County and to Kingston itself through perhaps additional bus stops, through more walking paths and bike paths connecting with the Empire State Trail. And one of the things that also, this is a great site. There's some incredible views and some incredible access opportunities, and we really want to understand those opportunities as well. And finally, one of the key things is that we see a lot in our projects is the idea of sustainability. And really, that's a very broad topic because the sustainability issues encompass a lot of planning, from very simple things about orientation to the types of materials we use and the type of construction methods that we use. So it's an ambitious series of goals that we have for the project, but we think that it's something that is worthwhile for the project. So Will, let's go to the next one. I think this one here is our first polling question, where we'd like to share, would like you to share with us your ideas in terms of what you think the priorities should be. So if you would please take a moment and just select up to 2 of the goals and concepts that we talked about, and where you think those fit into what you'd like to see for this development.
And please feel free to just write in an other answer if you don't see it on there. Please put it into the Q&A.
Okay, I think one of the things that I may have skipped over a little bit is one of the goals that we have is for support and recreation. And so I think the overall goal is to support health and wellness on the site. So we're looking at various programs that would really start to support that goal. And then, there's going to be a commitment to the outdoors and to personal well-being. So those are some of the planning ideas that we're going to build into the buildings themselves and to the landscape development. All right. I mentioned prior to the first slide that some of the things that we really want to start looking at is the site. All the sites that we work on have incredible opportunities, and they have some constraints. So we really want to start to understand the context that we're working with. So we start to develop some parameters, like within a 10-minute walk, what would we find? Within a 5-minute bike ride, what would we find? So there's a lot of different opportunities, and it starts to tell us how we might position our site to take advantage of these opportunities through connectivity, through developing relationships with these different components. So there's a lot of things there that we're starting to get our hands around. Can I get the next slide, please? So this black circle that we have here, that's sharing our 5 to 10 minute walk from the site. And within that, there's really a number of things. There's like the Golden Hill Nursing and Rehab Center, and then the Kingston Family Health Center within it. And slightly outside of it, we're going to start seeing, some other civic, cultural, religious, and educational opportunities. So we're poised to really start to take advantage of some of these. But I think when we get to the next slide, we'd like to, again, have another poll. We'd like to understand from you what you think are some of the recreational or cultural opportunities that we should be really taking advantage of, or are there other things that nearby that you think that we should also explore? So if you could take a moment and then maybe enter your comments into the poll.
And I think with this question format, we wanted to mention that a poll won't appear on your screen. This is not a multiple choice selection. So this is an open-ended question of which there will be a few throughout the presentation. So we encourage you to put your written answer into the Q&A. If there's something in the surrounding area that you think we should connect with or would make good sense to collaborate with on the project. Thank you.
Great. All right, this slide here is really building upon some of the things that we've learned through previous conversations with residents, with some of the county and city folks, and understanding and getting to understand the strengths and the opportunities and challenges. And I would like to share some of our findings with you. I think that when it comes to some of the strengths, I think people have identified the proximity to the Hudson and to the proximity to the Empire State Trail and how we might begin to weave our site into that. I mean, it's a great opportunity. And finally, one of the strengths is really the views, views of the Catskills and of the surrounding region, really wonderful opportunities. In terms of opportunities that we really want to start to strengthen, and those are really connectivity to the adjacent services. Some of those were seen in the previous slide. So we'd like to strengthen those either through actual access or developing programs with some of these entities where we can start to share facilities. And finally, some of our challenges are really going to be centered around zoning and the topography. While this is a great site, it does have some rather intense slopes that we're just starting to grapple with and need to build that into our planning exercise. But in this next poll, what we'd like to do is to get some of your ideas in terms of what you think some of the strengths, some of the opportunities, and some of the challenges might be for the site and for the development project itself. So this is kind of open-ended. So to put that into the chat.
Okay, Bruce, I'm going to go to the next slide.
Thank you. And before I hand this over to my colleague, Jared, who will walk us through the design process, I'd like to just leave you with this final site plan. And this is where we're starting from. This is the red line here is really the boundary of the site, and plopped down in the middle is the prison, which is no longer functioning, that is going to be demolished as part of this. But this is the site that we're starting with, and the context that we're working in. You'll see to the bottom, here's Route 32 and the Empire State Trail. And to the north are some of the other adjacent facilities that are bordering our new site. But what I'd like to do now is to turn this over to Jared, and he's really going to start to walk us through a little more about the design and how we're approaching it, and thinking a little more about the location of the buildings and how they could be configured on the site.
Sure. Hi, everyone. For those of you that I may have not have met at the in-person engagement session, my name is Jared McKnight. I'm a designer at WRT. And I just wanted to reiterate again, if anyone sort of was at the in-person engagement in September, this is a repeat of all that information. We've been actively starting to incorporate a lot of the comments and feedback that we received from that meeting in preparation for our third community meeting, which will be coming up in October. So this is, again, just going to be a repeat of that. And the site plan that I'm going to be talking us through right now was really our initial concept. In the past month, and even since our in-person community engagement session, with all of this information, we've received our site survey. So we're already starting to look at things like storm runoff. I see some questions coming in about that. There's a lot of existing utility infrastructure on site that we're going to be starting to get into more detail on, and starting to reconfigure what I'm about to walk you through. So I'm going to walk you through the original concept. Again, this is kind of our overall site plan. And then if we go to the next slide, our original concept here was really starting to maximize the potential of the flat areas of the site, and really have our building footprints kind of off to the side, and able to create kind of a centralized green space that could potentially have a nature trailer connection down to the Empire State Trail network, but also create kind of outdoor amenity open spaces for those sites, and then have a structure of kind of roads and parking off of that to service kind of the residents that would be living on this site. Then as we started to look at this a little bit further on the next slide, we started to think about kind of what that resident loop looks like, whether or not this site can start to actually touch the adjacent amenities and sort of programs that exist on the adjacent parcels, but also what it looks like for someone to be kind of circulating through this site, and especially that open space in the middle, and how it can form those connections. And then on the next slide, we started looking at kind of how we develop sort of the sort of housing typologies that we're looking at for this site. So we're looking at a senior oriented building to the western portion of the site, and then a series of townhome buildings across the central portion of the site. And we'll get into a little bit more detail on these in a little bit. But the other key asset of this is really looking at a community hub that would be able to service residents, but also potentially other programs for the larger community. Then next slide. And then this was kind of just a composite of all of those together. Moving on to the next slide. And this was kind of our final conceptual plan that we had initially submitted. And I can tell you kind of a lot of these themes are going to remain constant as we continue to develop this plan and understand the constraints of the site, the understanding the existing infrastructure and what it can support, and sort of how we're tapping into that. But I think some of the big things that we heard at the in-person session were questions around kind of these long dead ends and whether or not there might be a vehicular loop. So those are things that we're actively starting to engage and starting to recreate this site plan in a space that makes it more feasible now that we have our survey and have that added level of information. So moving on to the next slide. Again, as was mentioned previously, the site has kind of a clearing at the top where the jail is, where you can see kind of the flatter portion of the site. So looking at that A section, that's what cuts kind of east-west across the site. It's pretty flat along the area where the current jail is. But when we start to look at that B section, kind of the north-south section, you can start to see down at the bottom right of this page, we get a lot of really steep topography, and there's a lot of really important intact forest and natural habitat there. So while our initial plan kind of extended down into that area, we're now looking at kind of keeping our plan up in that clearing space only, and starting to understand how we can sort of proceed with this into the next steps. And that's something that we'll be excited to share with you all during our next community meeting in October. So on the next slide. here we just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the overall proposed site plan and the number of units that we're currently looking at. We're currently looking at about 160 units of housing on the site. Again, there would be a community building toward the entrance of the site, proposed about 5,000 square feet, one-story building that could have sort of flexible types of spaces. We'll talk about that in a couple slides. And then to the left of the page here, you see a mid-rise senior building that would be proposed to have 80 units of 1 to 2 bedroom. And then the typical townhome buildings, we're looking at a series of 2- and 3-story townhome buildings that would also be 80 units total. So looking at a total of about 160 units across the site. And again, this was kind of the initial plan. This is already kind of starting to adapt more to the site now that we have more information and starting to incorporate a lot of the comments that we received at the in-person meeting in September. And after we get comments from this meeting as well, we'll start to continue to incorporate those as part of the process and report back on those in October. So we wanted to just open up here. If anyone had any sort of questions, feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat function. If you have any questions or comments about the proposed site plan, again, we have not furthered anything for this presentation from the in-person meeting on September 1st, but we would love to hear sort of your feedback or questions on this, and we can get into some of those now or sort of toward the end during the open Q&A as well. I see a couple questions that have come in that I can just speak a little bit to maybe. Where is the storm runoff drainage going? What sewer are you planning to hook up with? We just received our survey this week, so we're in the process of exploring and examining the on-site utilities. There is a lot of on-site utility based on kind of the former jail that's still on site. That kind of ties into a number of the adjacent buildings in terms of sort of the county and the city buildings on the adjacent parcels. Will there be more than one road to access the development, or will it just be the current access that exists? Unfortunately, we're just looking at sort of one access road at this time. The slope to the southeast of the site connecting down to where Route 32 is a really steep slope and is almost unfeasible in terms of sort of looking at sort of what it would look like to get road infrastructure to actually form a connection down at that point. So currently we're looking at the existing Golden Hill Drive as the access point for the site. I guess we could move to the next slide, and as questions keep coming in, we can continue logging those. So the next thing we wanted to talk a little bit, and we shared this in the in-person session, so we're trying to adapt it virtually as well, as we started talking about different types of on-site programs and services. There's I think a desire in this process to really bring certain types of programs and services to the site in addition to the residential as well. So we're going to open up a poll here to see what types of programs and services, which is part of kind of the built infrastructure of the site, might be beneficial in this area. So Will, if you go to the next slide, I think we're going to open up a poll here. And the question is sort of what on-site programs and services do you feel this location could support in responding to community needs? And we've listed sort of a number here that have come up at the initial virtual engagement session. And then sort of these were all ones that were shared at the in-person session as well. This is multiple choice. We'd love for you to select up to 3, but if you feel strongly about 4, feel free to select sort of the multiple choice pieces. But we've been talking about things like an indoor gathering or meeting space. That could be something associated with the community building, job training or flexible supportive service spaces, spaces where local supportive services could actually come in at kind of like a part-time basis to use those types of spaces. Intergenerational fitness or health and wellness spaces that could also link up to the important connections between adjacent properties and some of the programs that exist there. Potential for maybe a daycare or youth program or after school program coming to the site or the community building. potentially a pharmacy, senior services or a health center oriented type program, educational or healthcare programs and services, more on the educational side of that. Or we heard talks about potentially, could the site support some sort of cafe or restaurant, especially for those that are kind of waiting for transit in these areas. So those were some of the categories that we had heard from previous meetings, and just wanted to hear a little bit more of feedback on those. And as people are typing some of those, I see a question here. Were there plans to arrange for an on-site tour of the property for the public to participate in? I think that's something that we can talk about moving into kind of our later engagement sessions, that we plan to have more in-person ones on site. So we will definitely look into that and keep everyone posted.
Yeah, and I'll second that. In our future events, that would be a really interesting component to try to tie in, keeping an eye though on the weather and the winter approaching. So we'll definitely keep that in mind. That's a great idea. Hopefully we can tie that to a future engagement event. Okay, Jenna, I'm going to close this poll.
Yeah, sure thing. And then another big component of this site is really its connection to the outdoors. I saw some questions here about the wildlife and habitat that kind of frequents this area of the forest. And that's another reason from our site visits, really wanting to kind of right size our development kind of within the clearing space, so we're not actively disturbing those assets in the forest and everything. So what we're going to be asking in the next poll is kind of what types of outdoor programs and amenities could facilitate more connections to the outdoors, more connections to health and wellness opportunities in the outdoors and kind of throughout the seasons. So Will, if you go to the next slide, we could open up that next poll. And here we're looking for kind of what outdoor programs, amenities would best interest the Golden Hill community and sort of local residents in this area. Or you and your household members. So we've separated them into a few different categories. The first two, A and B, are sort of gathering and socializing spaces. The first is kind of an idea of a flexible lawn for seasonal events, could be used throughout all 4 seasons. The second one is kind of picnic areas and grills to promote kind of outdoor gathering, sort of barbecue type spaces. The next two are about sort of gathering and relaxing. There could be opportunities for tree groves with hammock hookups, or sort of outdoor wellness areas for different types of outdoor activities to connect to nature. We're also looking at play for all ages. The intergenerational component is really, really important to this housing project. And how can we create sort of creative play zones, not only for kids, but also play for all ages. So outdoor fitness programs and activities that could engage adults and seniors as well in kind of that outdoor wellness program. And then lastly, we're calling something the ULSTER Green. This is really about sort of thinking more largely and regionally. How can we connect to nature and trails and form that connectivity to such important assets like the Empire State Trail System, which is so unique that it kind of runs past this area of the site. But also, is this a site that could support things like urban agriculture or other types of wellness activities that really connect people to nature? So if you have other ideas beyond these, we also welcome you to put any ideas in the Q&A or the chat function as well.
Okay, I'm going to close this poll. All right.
And then lastly, this is really, before I go on to the last couple slides and pass it back to Will, we've started looking at kind of the textures of the area around Kingston and Ulster County. And this is really getting into something that we're going to be presenting as part of the next community meeting in October, is really thinking about the texture and materiality of the site. We've been thinking a lot about the buildings, sort of how much housing stock they can support and sort of what the site programs could be, but what do the buildings look like? How do they kind of tie into the site? So these are just some initial inspiration images, and we look forward to sharing more about the design of the specific buildings at our next meeting. And then lastly, again, just to reiterate here, The goal here is to create a place for everyone intergenerationally, but also sort of forming important connections to other systems. And really sort of looking at the site from a connectivity perspective, but also a health and wellness perspective, how it ties into adjacent programs and services offered kind of at the larger Golden Hill site, but also how it creates kind of a unique identity for this specific site. So based on the responses we received in the in-person meeting, and then here again tonight, if you move to the next slide, Will, we're actually going to start with our updated plan that we'll present at the next meeting, starting to cite some of these ideas, some of these programs, so we can actually see kind of what they look like in the spaces and how that kind of aggregates to create kind of our site plan moving forward. And then to that point, I think on the final slide here, from my perspective, we just wanted to open this up to more of a catch-all. If anyone has any ideas or statements about a larger vision for the site, what would be your vision for the next generation of the Golden Hill site where the former jail is? You could place anything here. Some of the things we heard previously were opportunities for the community to connect to the site, building a sense of community on the site where everyone feels like they belong and are safe. So any sort of more catch-all open-ended answers about sort of a larger vision that we should be considering beyond what we've presented tonight, we'd love to hear your opinions and thoughts in the Q&A. And you can feel free to continue to put questions in the Q&A. We're going to get to some of the other questions that I didn't touch on yet toward the end of the meeting tonight. So feel free to continue to use the Q&A as a space to kind of share your ideas and your thoughts. And I'll pass it back to Will.
Great. Thank you so much, Jared and Bruce. I'm going to touch on now the affordability mix on the site. We've received a number of questions about, just who will live here, who can afford to live here, what will the mix of affordability be? And we've mentioned that one of the key goals of this development is to provide a broad level of affordability across the site. So I'm going to walk you through this chart we've created just to kind of give an idea of the affordability levels throughout the project. So on the left-hand side is a family size, 1 person to all the way up to a family of 6. And on the bottom axis is a scale of total income, annual income. This, about 100% of area median income in Ulster County depends on the family size, and that can be seen in the black line in the middle of the purple column. So for a family of 4, that's about $87,000. And that stretches throughout the county of Ulster. For family 2, that's about 70,000. And just to walk you through these colors here, this is an acronym, AMI, Area Median Income. It's a federal term. It expresses a percentage of that 100% of area median income for each family size. So to use a family of 4 as an example, 0 to 30%, the orange and yellow row to the left for family 4, that takes you all the way up to about $26,500 in annual income. 31 to 50%, which is labeled as very low income, takes you up to about 44,000. The blue column, or the blue row, which takes you up to about 80% of area income, is about 44 to 70,000. And the purple row, 81 to 130, is about 70,000 to 115,000 in total family income. And what I can say at this point is we're still studying the appropriate mix, but our goal here is to provide a broad level, which means we want to provide housing in every one of these colors. We want to provide low income housing for people who really need the cheaper housing to stabilize their lives, but also a mix of workforce and close to market rate housing in the purple. And if anyone has any questions about these terms or the way we plan to mix it, please put your question in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer it at the end of the presentation, and we'll be sure to answer written responses as well. The next slide is just touching upon this community engagement effort in general. So we are going to continue to have a number of these events, and I'll be sharing the schedule for the rest of the community engagement events on the next slide. The rules that we intend to try to follow here are we want to promote each event with enough time to ensure people are able to attend. We'll always be recording these events if they're virtual, and we'll post that recording up on the website. In addition to recording the questions we receive and providing written responses at the event, after the event, for everyone to see. Upon those being published, we'll send out an email blast to everyone on the email list to know that they're publicly available. And continuing on, we intend to start posting design and planning ideas that Jared and Bruce are producing up on our website so people can access them. And we'll be doing this on a regular basis for each meeting. And I just encourage everyone to go to our website and plug in your email and your contact information, and we'll be sure to keep you abreast of any further developments. Looking into the future, we are here in the yellow, the second community event. We intend to have a number more before the end of the year. And as Jared mentioned, at the next event, we plan to do it in person and a virtual edition as well. We'll be presenting some of the further development and refinement of the site plan based on the input we've received and some of the due diligence we've been able to gather about the site, about the topography and the challenges that we've encountered, and how we're going to respond to that, and walk through the changes from the previous schematic plan to the potential options we have moving forward. In addition to that, we're going to talk a little bit about the building materials and what these buildings are actually going to look like, and put some options in front of everyone and get some feedback about what makes the most sense. So we look forward to that, and we'll be sending out notices of the date of this upcoming event and location as soon as we can. Lastly, I wanted to walk through the timeline as it stands today for this project. Right now, we're in the first two phases, which is developing the concept design as we hear input and feedback during these community engagement sessions. Towards the end of the year, we're going to look towards working on our financing. And right now, we're anticipating hopefully an award sometime next year, which will allow us to start construction mid next year, end of next year, and the project is anticipated to be approximately 18 to 24-month construction period, which would allow us to open our doors and cut the ribbon in late 2024. Lastly, I just wanted to reiterate, some of the key opportunities that we're trying to capitalize here with the Golden Hill project, and that is taking advantage of the incredible views from the site and the natural surroundings, building an intergenerational community of both senior housing and family housing, and building a really broad base of affordability, multiple levels of income, and introducing mixed use components as well if possible, bringing commercial and community locations onto the site to better tie it into the Kingston community. And I think lastly, one of the main things is we really want to make the most of the open space throughout the site and that connection to the large amount of space we have up there on the site. And that's something we're going to further refine and hope to show continued progress on those design and those ideas in the meetings to come. And with that, that is the end of the presentation tonight. At this point, we are going to take a look through the Q&A and walk through some of the questions that we did not have the chance to address at this point. So,
Will, if you don't mind, I'll jump in to answer a comment from Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony says this project really needs to be connected via means other than an automobile in order to be viable and affordable. I totally agree. So I can tell you that Ulster County is committed to adding a UCAT bus stop up on the project site, so that for sure it will be connected to the bus network, as well as the trail connection down to the Empire State Trail that Will mentioned. So for sure, the neighborhood is going to be transit connected.
And part of that is why we're continuing to assess the site plan. So in this site plan that we presented here, there were kind of these long, more dead end sort of avenues to provide the parking. So we're looking at a loop that makes that sort of bus transit more accessible on the site and able to actually sort of complete that in a meaningful and effective way.
The next question we received was about the roadway in and out of the site, a challenge that the residents and homeowners of the nearby community would like to see abated is the use of a residential roadway as the primary egress and ingress from the Golden Hill complex. And I think Jared briefly addressed this before, in that the extreme challenge that we presented by bringing a roadway down the site through that topography and the woods. It's something that we'll continue to study, but I do believe that the current plan for the site is to maintain the existing Golden Hill Drive as the main ingress and egress for the site due to the enormous challenge of bringing that down to Route 32.
So just to be clear, Will, the intention is that Golden Hill Drive is the primary
Yes,
ingress and egress, not the residential streets surrounding the neighborhood.
that's correct. And that's a related question is the next one we received. Will there be more than one road to access the development site, or will it just be the current access that exists? And as we mentioned before, the site that is one of the challenges of the site. It is surrounded by some extreme topography and a lot of untouched woodland that we would prefer not to demolish if possible. So the current plan for the site is to use Golden Hill Drive as the primary ingress and egress road. I believe we answered the question about the on-site tour. There was a note here about connecting, running the trails downhill as there's a lot of wildlife in the area that frequents that area. Appreciate that comment, and we'll keep that in mind as we further develop that and see if we can find someone who knows a lot about the area and who can help better inform that plan.
Yeah, and we do a lot of work with trails and trail systems and making sure that we're not installing too much infrastructure that disrupts the flow of wildlife. We do a lot of really in-depth analysis about that kind of in our process when we propose to kind of create a linkage to a trail, especially something like the Empire State Trail. So that is going to be at the forefront of our understanding and process.
Okay, next one I got is the Glen and Marius Street are not built to support the current volume of vehicular traffic. This project will undoubtedly increase the traffic volume there, and therefore will improvements be made to Glen and Marius Street to protect pedestrians and the quality of life of homeowners. What I can say about this is that this project will go through the state's environmental and quality review process, and we will conduct a traffic impact study that will measure the impact of this project on the traffic in the surrounding area. And that study will measure if there are going to be any significant increases in traffic in the area, and will require mitigating measures if that is the case. And that is something that we will have to account for in our development plan. So I'm going to save any further more detailed answer than that until we've completed that traffic study and received some comments. And what I can tell you is that that study will be posted publicly on the planning board website once it is available.
Well, I see a number of comments and questions about pilots. I wonder if I might take a first crack at that and then let
Absolutely.
you fill in anything that I've missed. And I appreciate the questions about this. I just want to introduce that pilots for affordable housing projects are different from pilots for other kinds of projects, in that the primary purpose of the pilot is to create a predictable schedule of what the tax payments are going to be, so that Penrose can go out and get the financing for this project. So affordable housing developments are taxed differently from other kinds of commercial and residential buildings, in that the assessment is not based on the assessed value of the building. It's based on the project's incomes, essentially the rents that are being paid. And as you can imagine, in an affordable housing project where everyone's rent depends on their income, the rents that are collected from year to year will vary depending on exactly who is living in the project at that time. And that creates an unpredictability that makes it difficult for the developer to get the project financed. And so what the pilot does is create a predictable schedule going out year after year based on the expected rents based on the projected income mix at the project. And so the primary purpose is to create that predictability. And so it is going to be essential for the project to have a pilot. There will be a process around determining what that pilot is. And Will, I'm expecting that process is going to begin probably later this year.
Yeah, that's right. We need to have a better understanding of the costs to build this. And for that, we need to further this design. Really understand what we're building here so we can put a price tag next to it. And with that, we can determine the level of support we need from a pilot in order to make this feasible. So we need a bit more further information. We need to further our design, and then we'll start the process of applying for our pilot. So I think that actually addressed the two questions in a row on the pilot. Specifically, will we be pursuing one, and what would be the time frame for it?
Well, there was a couple questions about stormwater management.
Yep,
I know
go ahead.
We discussed that with our civil engineer recently, and I know that with the development of this size, that's an important component is to develop a stormwater management. I mean, we have to look at the amount of impervious surface we're adding to the project and then deal with the control of that. And rather than releasing it all in one fell swoop, we basically have to contain it for a slow release. So that's a pretty significant part of the project planning process and the site development. So that will be looked at as part of the project.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bruce. Next question I got was, when will the AMI figures be compiled? Or when were the AMI figures compiled? So that 100% of area median income that was listed on that slide was for the year 2020. It gets updated every year. So we'll be sure to update the slide once the new figures are released. Lastly, why does this project need a pilot if real property tax law 581A exists? So we're just not quite at the level where we can say definitively what path we're going to head down with this pilot. As we mentioned before, the property, in order to achieve this affordable housing property, there will have to be a pilot in place. And we need more time to further develop the drawings and the plan for the site to understand the total costs, to really finalize the underwriting and the numbers for this project. And with that, we can advance discussions on the required pilot for it. So we are not quite ready to have those discussions, but we will towards the end of this year. Can you share what questions were asked of you at the Tuesday Ulster County Chamber of Commerce breakfast, and what were your responses were? I can't say offhand I remember most of the questions. What I can tell you is that the chamber is going to be posting a video of, if they haven't already, because I believe it was live streamed, of the event. And it was about a half-an-hour event. And if you flip towards the end, you can see the questions we received. I see. I guess there's a response here that the video is available, but it's hard to hear the questions and responses. If we can find that those Q&A were written down in some way, we will be sure to release that and put it on our website for release. Unfortunately, I did not write down the questions myself. Okay, that is the end of the questions we received tonight. I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. If you have any further questions, please address them to goldenhill penrose.com. And we'll be sure to incorporate them into a Q&A response to the questions we received tonight. And we'll release that in a couple days after this event.
Thanks, Will. I want to thank everybody so much for coming tonight. Really appreciate everyone's input into this project.
Okay, and with that, we'll say goodnight. I appreciate everyone, and please stay tuned. We'll be having our next in-person event later in October, and we'll be sending an email blast out with the location and date and time. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Have a good night.